If a national disaster thrust us back into the dark ages, emergency food supplies will eventually run out. You absolutely need to know how to grow food, or else you and your family will die of starvation. In today's video, we are going to show you a simple step-by-step guide on how to organize your garden to maximize yield. In the very least, what you need to do is bookmark this video or download it and throw it on an emergency thumb drive, as this is going to be a power punch of potentially life-saving information. Today on the channel, Ashley from Gardening in Canada is going to explain in immense detail what you need to know to survive the proverbial end of days, or just save money on your food bill. Today's demonstration will be centered around these two diagrams here. For this example, our garden is oriented towards the south, and the sun is in the south moving from east to west. In part 2, we will talk more about the layout of your property and optimal garden placement. All right, so here we have two gardens. Year 1, year 2, because we're going to organize it differently. We can't organize our garden the same way each year, and why is that?
We have a number of different reasons for this. One is disease. Say you didn't have access to pesticides, or even if you do have access to pesticides, they don't necessarily work all the time. So in order to prevent that, we ensure that we're not planting the same plants in the same spot. People think that the soil system as a whole is what provides the nutrients. What provides the nutrients to your plant is exactly where your plant is positioned. So if you have a heavy feeder positioned here, that soil is going to be depleted compared to the next year where you maybe had a different plant, and we'll discuss what those plants are.
So what you're saying is that if I was to test this soil, depending on what was growing there, there'd be like little microclimates.
100%.
Wow.
Okay, so we're going to do squash across the back fence. Your spacing for squash, because it is such a big plant, it's going to take a lot of nutrients, a lot of space. Yeah. So you actually want these pretty far spaced out.
How far is that? Let's assume what, a couple feet?
No, probably like 3. A squash, you don't need many of them to feed your house. Lower the grocery bill, and for storage, you really don't need that many of them. And these could be pumpkins, these could be butternuts, these could be spaghettis. So just one squash variety. So if you're gonna do pumpkins, do pumpkins. If you're gonna do spaghetti,
don't mix them up.
Don't mix them up. Do a big trellis, because these...
What kind of trellis are we talking? What does that look like?
It's like a chain link fence type, or like a cattle panel type. So the next one we're gonna do is tomatoes. So these you can plant a little bit closer together. So the way that I like to plant plants like this is in a zigzag pattern. You can fit more plants in a space that's staggered.
Why are the tomatoes right next to the squash?
Okay, so these are probably second highest in my opinion. So tomatoes aren't as tall, depending on how you trellis them. So these, I would use cages, or I would use the string method. Then after that, I would do like a potato or something, because they are a little bit taller than most root vegetables. And these, I'm just gonna do mounds, because I really want to drive home the fact that you need to mound your potatoes. You can't just plant them in a hole. They have to be mounded.
So are we putting anything on this side of the trellis?
So on this side, what you can do, pole beans or peas. So something to that effect. I'm going to do peas. For peas, I would just plant them on both sides of the trellis. This side of the trellis is going to perform the best because of light.
And what kind of trellis is this? Is this a wire one again?
So this is just like a chicken wire. Like this is just a nice short, nothing crazy. So your peas aren't gonna last very long. This is actually probably gonna get ripped out anywhere near when your potatoes are finishing. And the reason for that is because these need a lot of sun to finish off and get some really nice big tubers in them. So ideally we're ripping out whatever's in this section early. We're gonna do brassicae species. So we could do cabbage, we could do cauliflower, we could do broccoli. They're heavy feeders to an extent. So having them between peas and what's gonna go underneath this is ideal to support them. They also terminate growth early in the season. So once it gets hot out, like if you still have these in the ground end of July, August, they're gonna bolt on you. So they need to be harvested in some cases earlier. And you do need to cover them, whether this is in the form of pantyhose. I know that sounds weird, but if you just take a piece of pantyhose and you cover the cabbage head, the bugs can't get at it. They don't need as intensive light as these guys back here. And so you can actually put these in like a shadier space in your yard. So the next one is beans. These are bush beans. If you guys aren't familiar with bush beans, they're the plant that keeps on giving. If you plant them properly, you should have an endless harvest so long as you're constantly picking. So we're just gonna put bush beans here. So everything that's green in this is a nitrogen fixer, meaning our atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen. And so these will actually pull the nitrogen out of the air into the soil. So they're going to cause a fertilizer within this. So really some important stuff there. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna do a root vegetable of some sort. So this could be beets, it could be carrots, onions, garlic, radishes.
Could you do both? Could you mix them up? Could you have carrots and onions next to each other?
No, I would do a row. So I would do like a row of carrots, a row of beets, a row of garlic, a row of onions. So this is gonna be leafy greens, herbs, lettuces.
Just totally inappropriate color for leafy greens, but okay.
I can't do green.
Would have thought green would have been a good...
No, I can't do green. We discussed this. The green is the nitrogen fixers, and we don't want to confuse the crowd. What we're gonna put in our containers?
Peppers.
Peppers.
And that's everything. That's all the crops.
No, we're gonna maximize this, man. What we wanna do in between all of this other stuff going around...
Dill.
What is this guy now?
Are you impressed?
I am. So you can do dill kind of sprinkled in and...
But what I find is that it's almost invasive. It grows everywhere. It takes over the garden. What does it give back? What does it do?
Are you serious? You can use it for pickling. You can freeze it. You can grind it and dry it. It helps with food fatigue. And when it flowers, it will bring in pollinators, which brings me into kind of my last suggestion is flowers. So put in flowers all over your garden. So if you have flowers, go for pinks, reds, yellows. You have pollinators who are attracted to the garden, and they're just gonna do the work for you. It's really, really important and it's key. So this second year, the first thing we wanna do is look at where our heavy feeders are, where specific crops we're gonna kind of do basically the opposite to an extent, but also keep in mind the sun still. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our tall heavy feeders on this side.
Oh, so we're gonna go vertical now.
Yeah. The other way to do it would be on a diagonal if we wanted to, but we want to also fill in the gaps of our heavy feeders. So what we want to put here is going to be pole beans, and I would put pole beans so that they go across this back fence area. And pole beans are quite tall compared to bush beans. And then you could do peas here if you wanted to. I never like to put potatoes in the same space again, so I'm going to put potatoes right down here.
Okay, so we're going to put the potatoes basically almost on the opposite side.
Yeah. And the reason for this is because potatoes have blight. And I'm always really cautious about potato blight because once potato blight is in your soil, it is game over for your garden. Potato blight can overwinter really easily if there's any potato tubers left behind or potato parts left behind. Tomato blight, I'm not as cautious of. And the only reason I'm not as cautious about tomato blight where we are is because it doesn't overwinter very well where we are.
Where do we put the tomatoes in here?
So I'm going to put tomatoes here.
Okay, so just slightly offset from where they were
Or
before.
you could put tomatoes here. We'll do a row of tomatoes here. Say you wanted to start introducing perennial plants.
Some berries or strawberries or something?
Raspberries, strawberries, yeah, that sort of thing. Keep in mind that if you do perennial patches that they're permanent, you can splice those in wherever you want, wherever they're necessary. So you can put perennials anywhere. I think perennials are important because A, they attract pollinators, B, they help with just excess water in the spring. It's a plant that just keeps on giving. So perennial plants are one thing that I would start introducing around year 2. The reason for that is because they are needy. So they do need to be watered and cared for excessively compared to what just an annual would get or need. Once you get down pat how to garden, what it takes to water, I would introduce perennials then. I wouldn't do it before then. Only reason is because you're really quickly gonna realize how the sun moves through your yard. So if you have shady spots, if you have compaction, you know it's gonna be very difficult to deal with, that might be where you put a perennial so you don't have to deal with it as often. If you did squash this year, you may only do, 3 plants on this side, and then say you do 2 plants on this side, and rather than trellising, you're gonna force the vines this way out onto the lawn rather than going upwards. And so forcing it out onto the lawn, it can still capture all the water and nutrients it needs, do its thing, but it's not gonna impede on your garden. So you may need to do some redirection, but otherwise it should be good to go. I like my brassicae species to follow my peas and beans. They just perform better in this section. Now keep in mind you did have heavy feeders here before, but maybe you wanna put the nasturtium in between the cabbage just to really add a little bit of nitrogen fixation and also support your tomatoes flowering. So in this section here, what you want to do is you want to put in your leafy greens, your herbs, root vegetables, that sort of thing. So again, you can place them however you really want. So you could do root vegetables up here, and then yeah, lettuce and herbs would be kind of in this section. And if you're gonna do, root vegetables, lettuce and herbs, like continual harvest type plants, is I would plant a section here in week 1. And then week 2 of your growing season, I would plant another section. So this is all bare ground. Week 3. But yeah, that's a pro tip where you continually have a harvest. So if you plant lettuce, for example, it can bolt as it gets hotter. So it flowers really quickly. And when it's left in the ground too long, it goes to flower. So one way to prevent that would be every week you would start a little section of it. So then you would be eating this section by the time this section's getting planted, for example. You always want to make sure you have a pathway to get in here to harvest though, because now you've placed these vegetables
what we do,
in the
and
middle.
tell me if this is wrong, I put like planks of wood in between each row. Is that good or bad?
No, that's good, yeah. Yeah, that disperses your weight. It prevents compaction to a point, yeah. And wherever you have compacted soil, I would throw in a tillage radish. And what they will do is they'll drill down and they'll fracture the soil, allowing these roots to do the rest of their job. These I would not harvest. I would leave them in the ground to rot over winter, and they will leave an airspace. Similar to how you're kind of spicing flowers in everywhere, you're spicing in tillage radish to help fracture the soils.
And how deep do you till? Like how much tillage do you need?
When it comes to tillage, there's a couple different modalities. One is you don't do it, because it can be damaging to your soil. It can result in topsoil loss, that sort of thing. The other idea is that it's necessary. It has to happen because you have a heavy clay soil. So if you have a heavy clay soil, I would encourage you not to be scared of tillage. It may be your only tool to make it work. My mindset for gardening is you only have so many years to garden, and it can save you so much money. I wouldn't get too dogmatic or hung up on one way of gardening. I would use the tools that are accessible to you. So if the rototiller is what's making your life easier, use the rototiller. If you are noticing a lot of topsoil loss, you're noticing that when it rains, the water's moving a lot of soil, then I would actually pull away from tillage, and I would utilize different methods for that. If you till, I would mulch, and you won't have to till as much the next year because you're going to hold the moisture in the soil system, and it's going to prevent compaction from rain or water smashing onto it. So mulch will help with your soil if you have that sort of an issue. So I would utilize that whenever possible.
What about weeds? Last question for you. What about weeds?
Once everything's germinated, mulch.
What kind of mulch?
Grass clippings is like literally the best. People think it's crazy. I started using grass clippings. My moisture retention,
it won't grow grass. The grass won't start growing.
No,
in there?
You have to cut it before it goes set seed. You want to make sure your weeds aren't setting seed before you mow your grass. If you got dandelions, with seed in it and you just mowed your lawn, don't use that in your garden. So mow on a regular basis. But grass clippings are so thick and heavy, it just chokes out all the weeds. All the competition is just gone. It beats straw, it beats wood chips, it beats everything. If you have access to grass, dump your grass on your plants, 100%. You will have to weed in the initial stages until you get the grass, until things are germinated. And that first month, until things really take off, be out there weeding literally every 3 days, once a week. I know it sounds crazy, but it'll make a big, big difference. So root vegetables, carrots, beets, potatoes, garlic, despise weeds. They do so poorly in the face of weeds. Ones that tend to not do poorly with weeds are these taller, more viney type crops. So pumpkins, squash, tomatoes, these I can actually leave in place. But for basically this half of the garden, just weed like your life depends on it until you can get the mulch in place.
Okay. That's amazing. I learned so much. It felt like I was in school for a second when I was sitting down there. Jesus. I want to thank you for coming out. We're going to go out to the farm and we're going to milk some goats or cows or whatever you got out there. Okay, no, thanks for coming out, guys. And if you have any more questions, you better go and check out her channel. This is the time of year. Pretty much you have an answer to every possible question. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.